Hey guys, what's up? My name is Sky Webb and I'm here to talk about a true crime story that I cannot get off my mind. But before I get started, I just want to put out a little disclaimer that I mean no harm to any of the victims or the victims' families, and I wish everyone who was hurt within this story the utmost peace and solace, either in rest or in recovery. With that out of the way, happy True Crime Thursday. There's a couple of things I just want to really quickly get through before I get into the story, and that is first and foremost that I'm still not in my usual YouTube filming area. This is just my room, so I'm sorry, I apologize. It'll be back soon. And secondly, I apologize for looking like shit in the last like 3 or 4 videos that I've uploaded, but I was really sick and that was my face, so I also apologize for that. And then the last thing is that I don't have a tripod at the moment, so my phone is resting on a straightener hair box thing and it keeps changing like angles, so if I'm all over the place, I'm sorry for that. I can literally see it moving right now and it's really doing my head in, but whatever. Today's case is going to be a little bit different to the usual cases that I cover, and that's because this criminal in particular actually really enjoys the attention and limelight and credit for his crimes, and he's pretty infamous. He's been covered in a lot of documentaries and TV shows and books and all kinds of things, and he's often kind of dramatized and sometimes like bordering embellished throughout the media, and I just don't want to do that because I know he really seems to enjoy that, so I'm just going to keep it really short and simple. But as I said, he is very infamous all over the internet if you guys want to do some further reading into him and his disgusting crimes. Today we're talking about Ed Kemper. Ed Kemper was born in December 1948, and from a very young age he started to exhibit some pretty sociopathic tendencies and violent tendencies. When he was 10, he buried the family cat alive, waited for it to die, and then dug it up and then decapitated it and put its head on a stick. At 13, he killed another family cat, and then from there on he continued to hurt and kill and do weird things with animals like most sociopaths do. He was the only son out of 3 children, and he was raised by his alcoholic and pretty abusive mother who he had a real hatred towards. His mum definitely had some kind of like issues. She definitely resented her ex-husband, and Ed was sort of like spitting image of the ex-husband. He was also the only son, as I mentioned, so she definitely took a lot out on him rather than the other children, and she could be very spiteful and nasty, very mean, and would just torment him and tease him and abused him. When Ed was 14, he ran away to live with his dad. He missed his dad, but his dad actually sent him to go and live with his grandparents on his mother's side, so he hated it there. He was on a ranch with them, but he thought that his grandpa was just like senile, and he thought that his grandmother was as nasty and tormenting and emasculating as his mother was, so he didn't get along with either of them. At 15, after getting into an argument with his grandmother, he went and got a shotgun that he was gifted to go hunting with, and he shot her in the head. He then decided that his grandfather would be mad about the murder and perhaps upset by it, and so he decided to shoot him and kill him as well when he arrived home, so that's what he did. He actually called his mum at this point and said, "I just killed both your parents, what do I do?" And she said, "Call the police." So he did, and he waited to be picked up. He was placed into an asylum for the criminally insane, but he actually only spent 5 years there before being released into his mother's care and had his entire criminal record expunged. So it was like he never killed his grandparents. While he was in the asylum, he took a number of IQ tests, and the highest score he got out of all those tests was 145, which is almost double the average IQ test score. So he was very intelligent, and a lot of the time he spent in this asylum, he just pretty much used it to assess and analyze the other patients and looked into psychology quite a lot, and he analyzed the psychiatrists and psychologists as well, and this sort of assisted him in learning ways to manipulate them and show that he had grown or, developed and gotten better when he really hadn't. Once he was released, he tried to become a police officer, and he would have actually succeeded if it wasn't for his massive height. He was 6'9", which is fucking huge. And at the time, you just weren't allowed in the police force if you were that big. I don't know if that has since changed, but back then, definitely a big no-no. He did remain friends with a lot of the officers though, and he spent a lot of time at this bar called the Jury Room, and that's where a lot of police officers went to drink and hung out. Ed was in a car accident that wasn't his fault, so he was awarded a pretty large sum of money, and he used that money to go and buy a big new fancy car. Once he started driving this car, he noticed that there was a lot of women in the area, especially on the highway, that would hitchhike. And so he started picking up these women, and he claims that he picked up around 150 different women and took them to their destinations. He never did anything to these women as far as we know and as far as he claims, but he says that this is when he started to get little zapples. So zapples is a word that he uses to describe getting a really intense sexual urge or violent urge against these women. Between 1972 and 1973, Ed would pick up different hitchhikers after having really bad fights with his mother. And so he picked up 6 hitchhikers in particular, and he would take them to remote locations rather than taking them to their destination, and he would rape them, he would murder them, then he would decapitate them, and then he would take their heads home and have sex with their heads. The victims' names were Mary Ann Pesk, Anita Lecheska, Ikuku, I'm so sorry if I didn't say that right, I'm sure I didn't, but I'm so sorry, Cindy Shao, and Rosalie Falk. He claims that each time he murdered one of these women, he thought about killing his mum, and that's really where I guess the anger and the violence stemmed from, was his mother. But Ed at the time decided that he needed to perfect his murder skills before he killed his mum. So these women were almost like practice to him. On the 20th of April 1973, Ed's mum came home after a long night of drinking, and she woke him up as she came in. So he beat her to death with a claw hammer before slicing her throat. He then proceeded to decapitate her before having sex with her head, which I really thought he might skip with this one in particular, but he didn't. And then he hung her head on the wall and screamed at it for an hour, and then he threw darts at it, and then he cut out her tongue and her vocal cords and tried to get rid of them down the garbage disposal, and the garbage disposal couldn't cut through her vocal cords because they're too strong or whatever. And he said that this was fitting because she fucking yelled at him so much, and so that's why he yelled back at her, and that's why he cut out her tongue and that, and clearly had really bad mother issues. He then invited his mum's best friend over, and he did this so that he could make up a story that they had gone on a trip on a girls' weekend together, so there was some kind of alibi, and he killed her. He then fled in a car with a bunch of guns and ammo, and he thought that it was going to be a really big high profile case. He thought that they were going to be after him. He thought it was going to be a huge manhunt and come to a very big shootout at the end of it, but it didn't. Nobody even knew that they had died yet. So Ed got bored and he decided to phone the police himself, and he confessed to killing his mother and killing his mother's best friend. Unfortunately, the police didn't take him seriously, and so they hung up, told him to come in later, call back later. And so he did. He called back later, and this time he asked to actually speak to a police officer that he knew personally. And so to this police officer, he confessed again to killing his mother and his mother's best friend, and this time to the other 6 women that he had killed. Once he was taken in, he gave a very detailed confession to all of his crimes. Once he was taken in, he gave a really detailed confession to all of his crimes and all of the murders, and then he ended up pleading non-guilty by way of insanity. And he had to do this, well, he didn't have to do this, but he did this because he didn't want to plead guilty, but he gave such a detailed confession, he really had no other choice than to say, oh, I'm crazy. Like, he was, however, found by 4 different psychologists to be completely and utterly sane, which is kind of mind-boggling, to be honest. And that's despite confessing to one of them that he had engaged in cannibalism with the bodies of some of the women that he killed, but he later retracted that statement, so it's unclear whether or not that's true or why he decided to tell one psychologist that, especially if it wasn't true. They all said that he was sane, he was very aware of what he was doing, he knew the difference between right and wrong, and he was just simply obsessed with the infamy that these murders would give him. He was found guilty on all counts for all of the crimes he committed, and he actually requested the death penalty, and not just the death penalty, but death by way of torture, which is different. So that was refused, and he was instead sentenced to 7 years to life for each murder that he committed, and those were supposed to be served concurrently. Once in prison, he was very manipulative and controlling, and he kind of toyed around with different inmates. One inmate in particular would sing pretty often while people were trying to watch TV, and so Ed would pour water on him or flick water at him when he was singing, and then when he didn't sing, he would give him peanuts. And so it got to the point where this man started to ask permission before singing, and Ed was quite pleased with himself, like having trained him essentially. And that kind of goes to show the mentality that this man had. He was always considered a model inmate, but every single chance of parole that he's tried to get out on has all been denied, and there was actually quite a few of them, so I'm grateful that they were all denied. His next chance of parole will be in 2024. Hopefully that will also be denied, as like it fucking should be. He's an absolute madman. He does a lot of interviews. He's done a lot of interviews trying to demonstrate that he is a changed man and that he's grown and he's learnt from this. And he speaks specifically to violent young people who might have had these urges but think they have it under control, or, you know, these people who have these kind of thoughts to do this kind of sick shit. And he basically says to them, like, once you start, it's very hard to stop. If you think you have it under control, you don't. And he tries to play like this person who is trying to help. I personally think he is absolutely full of baloney and is just playing the long game to try and essentially manipulate the public. Someone that smart and so obsessed with manipulating people, I feel like that would be a pretty good goal to have, and to like get you through prison is to have an end game, which would be to manipulate everyone and eventually get your freedom. But hopefully he never gets his fucking freedom, because he is dangerous. That's the case of Ed Kemper. There is a lot of information out there on the internet, as I said earlier. So if you are interested in him, there's so much information to read up about him. I just didn't want to delve into his murders too much, because I just think it's fucked up. I think it's fucked up how he enjoys it. Like it annoys me. I don't know what to tell you. I'm sorry. If you liked this case, please leave it a big thumbs up if you feel like it. I would really appreciate it, and be sure to subscribe so that you can see all my new videos. I post every single Thursday all about true crime, and I would love to have you be a part of it. Thank you guys so much for watching. Stay safe out there. Bye. Ed Kemper was born in December 1948. How fucking old is he? New fancy car. Did he really just open the door and make that noise? That was rude. Bro, you gotta tell me if you're gonna open the door or wait till I'm not talking, because otherwise you just hear the squeak.
Sorry, Max called.
Who's
Max
that?
employed.
So he was an award. Why can't I say that properly?